I'm Jake Carr, and I'm in Group 4. I was just wondering if you feel like the company Dixon would have made the same the same moves if the Chinese didn't get involved, i.e. move into Mexico and stuff. Would they have done stuff like that, found the cheaper material if they didn't get involved at all?
I think it's difficult to say because the Chinese coming in is not necessarily the trigger for them to set up manufacturing plants elsewhere. It could have happened from any point of globalisation. Say a Korean company could have come in and done the exact same thing, or people could have started demanding cheaper pencils just because they heard about cheaper pencils being sold in other countries and they feel like they should be able to get cheaper pencils in the USA. Or because of the internet, they could buy them online from, say, China and ship them in for probably less than what you could buy them in the USA. But to say that if China hadn't gone in, would have changed anything, I think it's difficult to say just purely because it's a trigger, but it's not necessarily the reason why it's actually created those situations. It was really just a trigger for it, I think.
I think it would have happened anyway, regardless of China. It would have been another country or something. So.
It's more due to globalization and the change in the market that it occurred.
Cool. Okay.
Okay, so answer your question, Jake?
Yeah.
Super. We'll go to Group 1 for the next question.
You spoke about the Chinese pencil moving into America. You spoke about the advantages and drawbacks of that for America. I was wondering what the advantages and drawbacks were for the Chinese market economically.
And can we just get your name and which group you're in as well? Just for the
It's James Group 1.
So James Group 1, yeah.
Well, it's possible, but it's going to be much harder than in USA because China already have a lot of pencil manufacturing, obviously, and it has more cheaper materials and cheaper labor cost, and everything is cheaper basically. So if for US a company want to go into Chinese market, it has to be some high quality products because Chinese could be like some luxury stuff. So yeah, there's a way to do that, but it will be a lot harder. And yes, I think it's possible for companies like Dixon because obviously Dixon makes some very high quality and products for US market also. So yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, we can see that the US market was more reaching for cheaper pencil than high quality. So
I think there's no real disadvantage to China, like the Chinese companies being taken over by Dixon. But I suppose it's just like more of a market in the US as well, like they're just expanding, I suppose.
did that answer your question?
Can anybody else think of any disadvantages for a country to be producing goods for another country?
It depends what they're set up to do. If you're set up like China is to manufacture good primary and secondary goods, then they're, especially China, they're going to want to export them to other countries that need them because they can undercut prices because of their competitive advantage to, like John said, with lower wages and greater resources. If you take the UK, for example, we lost our coal mines because they weren't able to produce enough coal for the whole of the country, and it was much more expensive because of the high wages. So China were able to come in, undercut us, and we now supply, well, I think we get 98% of our coal from China. So it's what you're geared up to do. I think the disadvantage for China, really, on negative press, is really what the only disadvantage is, that they look like they're undercutting and dumping on a lot of companies and countries, and it's negative press for them, and obviously people get annoyed about it. But I think that's really the only disadvantage for them, because they've got so much competitive advantage in that area, like India has now as well, and Brazil. They're producing well over the domestic demand for it, so they have to export it if they're going to keep people and the industrial boom that's going on in all three of those countries going. And as John said, that if they're more like America, where they're set up to produce more high quality goods, then it's a lot more niche markets that you're aiming for and a lot more developed countries that you're aiming for. And therefore, there is a lot more disadvantages to that because you have to specialise in, say, financial marketing in the UK or aerospace in the USA. So I think that's the difference. You have to be set up differently, and it depends what you've got in your country and where you are in the industrial scale of things.
Okay, so this is clearly talk about advantages for a country such as China, for example, in producing. And also, if you think back to the macroeconomics lectures, which I'm sure many of you have been through or will be going through, about the kind of the movement of currency around the world as well, and the implications that has for both the country producing and the country who's buying. In terms of disadvantages as well, yeah, let's think about is it sustainable for a country like China? So their economy has really grown quite substantially, double figure growth over the past few years. Is that sustainable going forward, given that their model is essentially all about cost? Will there be another country that comes along in 5 or 10 years' time that can produce it even cheaper than China? So a specific example of that, if we think about DVD players, when DVD players were invented, they were invented in which part of the world? Who owns the intellectual property behind something like a DVD player, a piece of technology?
Is it someone in the UK?
Yeah, so in the West, essentially, in the West. And the way that works is that, of course, not all DVD players are produced in the West. Many of them are produced in China because there's a clear cost advantage there. The profit associated with that, so for the person the country that invented it, the intellectual property means that they can license the production of that DVD player to another country such as China. And for every player produced, in this case, the West will get about $20 as a license. So you can think of that as a profit margin, $20 per unit. For somewhere like China, who's producing that, actually making that DVD player, the gross profit, is significantly lower, less than $1. So immediately there, you can think about the sustainability of that and where the kind of, if you focus purely on manufacturing, your margins are always going to be very tight because you're constantly always about cost. And there's always somebody else in the world who can do it cheaper.
Yeah, and you can see that the USA tried to control the currency with the currency exchange. And the UK as well, but they were forced to stop it because of the appearance, for example, of the Europe of the single market.
Yeah.
And of course it brought more like profit because their dollar was much higher than, for example, the Hong Kong dollars.
And that's a very topical issue at the moment. So in the news in the past few weeks, there's been something called currency wars, which is where certain countries have tried to fluctuate the value of that currency to get more imports or exports. We'll leave that question there. We'll go to, just so everyone's got a chance to ask a question, we'll go to group 3 for their question.
My name's Nick, I'm group 3, and I was just wondering, you mentioned the Schengen Agreement. What exactly is it? What effect does it have on globalization?
Well, the Schengen Agreement is actually an agreement for traveling, for resource, a free travel around the European Union. You have to be specific about it because Europe is a geographically thing, while the European Union is an agreement between 27 countries. So within those 27 countries, there's the agreement of being able, for example, I'm from France, and I can come into UK with my ID without even the passport, and it's easier for the resource as well, because there's no barrier, like cost to send it for exchange of currency and stuff like that. Also, it's really good for the countries because you can go studying, for example, in the university around Europe without needing a visa. So, yeah.
Do they have any effect on imports of goods from countries like China?
Yes, they do, because as I said, the currency exchange, that's not, the agreement is that you don't need currency cost to exchange. For example, the euro. So now all the Europe, except UK, has the euro, so it's much easier to actually import and export. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It looks like you might
Yeah.
have something else. Something might not be very clear on that.
No, I think I get it.
You want to?
So just to be clear, Schengen is about the free movement of people and goods,
Yeah.
specifically Schengen.
No, there's also there's also NAFTA, which is the there's the traveling of free goods, like it's an agreement, but not people. People, for example, from Mexico to the United States, we can see that the frontier has strengthened compared to in Europe. So it's more an agreement on the goods than on people.
Okay.
As well, you need from the United States to Canada, you need a visa to go there, to go and live there, or it can be exported.
So the main topic of the presentation is about the movement of goods, and it might be worth checking if Schengen is about the movement of people or the movement of goods. Not all European countries are signed up to the Schengen Agreement, so the UK is not a signatory to it.
With some exception, but
There's some exceptions. So
usually the agreement was that, but yeah, the UK didn't want because their currency was
there's all
higher.
sorts of politics behind it. But if you compare, if you're travelling between France and Germany, there's not even a border there. It's as if you're going in the same country.
In Brussels as well, you can just go in
Exactly.
car or walking. Because
Going from France to the UK, there is a border, not just because there's a bit of water in between it, but when you cross that, somebody will physically check your
ID.
passport. Right. So there is that border. If the UK was signatory to Schengen, that check wouldn't take place. So the Schengen Agreement is a group of countries who, in practice, see themselves as one country for the purposes of borders and immigration. Not all EU countries are signed up to Schengen. The point about the EU is that in the entirety of the EU, there is the principle of free movement of goods and currencies. It's taking away trade barriers, no matter where you go. So moving boxes of pencils between France and Germany is exactly the same as moving them from France to the UK. For example, there are no trade barriers or tariffs that you have to pay in moving them across the borders, and that's the whole point of the EU itself. NAFTA was mentioned, that's a North American example. We'll go to, I cleared that point up.
yeah.
We'll go to group 1 again for another question.
I'm Claire from Group 1. You mentioned that in 2050 there'll be so many people that there won't be enough meat to sustain everyone without globalisation. How exactly does globalisation help with this?
Okay, so at the moment there is an agreement between USA, UK, Sweden, France and Germany, which is currently trying to produce, grown meat. So they're in laboratories, laboratory meat. And that's one of the ways that they feel that they can actually do it. So they'll take out the whole equation of having to use animals and actually farm the meat from stem cells and actual cells in a laboratory. I think only last year they produced about that size of meat, and it was the first ever consumption of laboratory produced meat. And there's movements like this that are allowing these sort of research and development to go on, but it has to, because of the price of it is something astronomical, like it's already into billions and billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, to make that small little bit there. And what they're saying is that without funding from a lot of different countries and a lot of also the intellectual properties from a lot of different countries, it's allowing people to produce enough food. And also you've got to remember that with globalisation, just itself, just the world trade has shot up dramatically since, say, 1970. It's something like three times as much world trade in food alone. And it's just the fact that if you're able to specialise with, say, USA with its cornfields in Texas, which are vast areas bigger than Wales of cornfields owned by sort of 2-3 farmers, they're able to do so much more food on it at such a less cost, which means that we're able to sustain ourselves through the population growth. But whether globalisation will actually end up saving us, or whether the irony of new life will actually kill us, so many new people will actually end up killing us, who knows? But there's also suggesting that insects may be the next meat that we eat, rather than beef. If that answers your question.
So which is the point that economies of scale and doing things.
Yes, exactly. That is exactly
on
what it is.
volume. Yeah, just to link it back to. Great. Okay, so we'll go to group 4 for another question.
I'm Alicia from group number 4, and you said that globalization is a good thing because it promotes sustainable development of human race, economy integration, immigration. However, can you name some negative effects of globalization?
Fair few.
Or the culture of the city, because some culture feel like quite overwhelmed by the globalization, for example, the Americanization. So they've been quite overwhelmed by America and its culture. And we can see, yeah, that's one of the negative effects. Also, some countries, like developing countries, don't feel really the good effects of it because it's more in trade, world trade. And the ones, for example, like in South Africa, they don't really have the good effects of it because they're not really in good trade.
With Dixon as well, like they cut jobs in the US, like obviously the US will see that as a negative thing through losing jobs and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean you're going from stuff like USA, UK, where we're already restructured from the industrialisation that we saw in the 1900s up to now. They're now having to restructure. So as I said, we lost our coal mines, as Gemma said, Dixon lost a lot of jobs. And we're now moving into much more high-end trade. So that's why USA specialises in aerospace, we specialise in financial trade. It's becoming very skilled jobs that we now offer the world, because that's the only thing left that we can do, because there's such a vast difference in our education system to, say, China's or elsewhere, that's set up to do different things. If you look at the emphasis in this country, it is on something like finance or biology. So, you know, when you go to university, there are a lot more high-end degrees that people now seek for jobs. If that makes sense. So, as Gemma said, you're losing a lot of the jobs and a lot of restructuring. There's a lot of pain being saw in those people that haven't gone to university and haven't got the right degrees for those high-skilled jobs, which means that there's a much bigger income differential between the people with those high-skilled and those low-skilled jobs.
Yeah. Yeah, that provokes a lot of inequalities, even within the country. For example, in China, we can see there's one of like the biggest wages there, but also one of the lowest. Some people work for like £10 a day, maybe not even. So that globalization can also provoke like one of the biggest inequalities in the world.
Actually, £10 a day is very good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So another problem, I think, is immigration. A lot of people immigrate to Western countries and use their limited resources and some social benefits. So to give the government or everything, the local people a lot of stress to share the resources and stuff. So it's kind of a problem.
And the one that's the most interesting one, I think, is the way that it's changed cultures. Not in the sense of that there's a dominant or recessive culture, and like with the Americans, that the American culture is a very dominant one and it's taking over a lot of recessive ones. It's actually that there's a change in what we perceive in time at the moment. So at the moment we think that everything should be happening right now. That's why we have mobiles that access Facebook, Twitter, every other social media network. You want to know what's happening in the world, what's happening around you. You want goods right now. And if you go back, say, 50 years, everything was, I'll save up and I'll get something later and I'll enjoy it more and I'll benefit from its quality. And if something took longer, it was perceived to have something of a better quality. Whereas nowadays, everyone wants everything much quicker. And that is only because globalisation has created that culture of, we'll be able to give it to you next week, today, tomorrow, something like that.
Also, from the culture point as well. For example, people in France or in the UK, for example, there's Japanese restaurants now everywhere. So some people on Chinatown in big cities, and for example, if they go visit Chinatown or if they go in Japanese restaurant, they actually think that's the culture of the country, that's what they eat, but that's quite different from, like, that's not the culture actually. You have to go in the country to understand it, and because of globalization, well, people tend to not understand that anymore and think that the world has a uniform culture, which actually is not true.
So, some very interesting points there. And I thought actually about the effects of globalisation on the skills, demand for labour, skills in the labour market in the UK. So some good points there. What you were saying, this is about erosion of culture. I think it's really, really interesting. So once I had an Irish lecturer, and he said that he always got really annoyed when he went anywhere in the world. You go to any city and they had an Irish pub, is what they called it, which he said was nothing like a real pub in Ireland, because it had bicycles stuck to the wall and signs everywhere, like those old vintage signs everywhere and things like that.
Yeah,
Nothing like actual pubs in Ireland, and he didn't like it. But then he said he went back to Dublin, so in Ireland, and all the real Irish pubs there, the actual traditional Irish pubs, have a hard time there because loads of tourists go over expecting to find pubs with bicycles on the wall. So what happens? All the real Irish pubs close down, and you get this, and pubs start putting bicycles up on the wall, and you get this sort of, almost like it becomes, the perceived culture becomes the real culture, even in the place where it's meant to be depicting. So interesting example there, I thought. And we've probably got time for one or two quick questions. So another question from group 3.
Is it possible to beat the competition of price against China? Oh, I'm Yuki from Group 3.
Yes. The only way to beat them is to join them. If you want to beat them, you've got to manufacture either with them, inside them, or get products from elsewhere that do it at exactly the same price. There's no way safe for an American company to offer a wage that's anywhere near as low as a Chinese company. They get done for dehumanising the worker. So the only way that they can really compete with them is to join them and manufacture with them or get the products from them. And then you start, as Dixon did, they start to be able to compete with them on price and on efficiency. And that's really the only way that you could compete with them feasibly in those sort of countries. But as Gemma mentioned earlier, you're going to lose jobs from it whether you like it or not.
Okay. So that's one path which Western countries might go down is to continue with the production, continue with their current production. So that's one strategic pathway to continue with what they've got in terms of manufacturing. Another approach might be to focus on those kind of niche skills and develop intellectual property, which is of much higher value and much less easy to replicate than manufacturing might be, for example. Right, one more quick question from any group. Anybody got a burning question that they'd like to ask? It's not been answered.
I'm Akshay from Group 1. You said about Dixon, like when the Chinese company started using cheaper pencils, they had to move their base to Mexico and move to China and make cheaper pencils and stuff. So in terms of globalization and the way it's increasing every year, where do you see Dixon or a company of that sort about 20 years down the line? I mean, how stable and where do you see a company like that?
Good question.
I think the system will be stable for a long time, very long time. I think companies tend to, integrate into like pencil manufacturers. They tend to become one big, very massive, big companies, like every country in the world. So companies like Dixon maybe will later, if it's become more stronger, it will become the first one in American or first one in the world maybe. And if it's lost, then it's lost its company to others. So yeah, so this is not quite a stable system because globalization makes things change very So basically, some, just one thing I want to add, like in China or UK, every country has some, company or some company last over 100 years. Some restaurants or something like that. But I think it won't happen in this time. It's going to be both and develop rapidly and will die.
They're still like a company now, right? They are still going. I'm not sure there's been any more developments if they've, bought another factory somewhere else or anything, but they are still going.
Yeah, but they are losing in one battle or something like that. So there's not much development for them.
Okay, and so Dixon now got bought up by a Italian automaker. It still exists, but nearly went to the brink of bankruptcy in the past few years. Great, okay, so we'll finish it there. Thank you very much to Group 2. Thank you for all the questions. Well done.